We will fight to our last breath until this baby gets the justice that she deserves.
Looked at her and said, "What happened to this baby?" She looked at me and told me, "Don't you start on me too."
He used my work to make people think that she's innocent.
She thought that that made her look like she was a grieving mother, that she was a good mother, that Macy was her whole life.
She's out there walking in the streets. What's going through your mind?
I'm worried that she is going to hurt someone else.
They say a mother's love is the strongest force in the world. It's supposed to protect, to nurture, to keep a child safe from all harm. But what happens when that love becomes the very thing a child needs protection from? This is the story of Macy Grace Diddy, and it will change how you see everything. 2 years old. That's all the time Macy Grace Diddy got in this world. 2 years of birthday cakes and bedtime stories, of first words and tiny footsteps. And then someone decided that was enough. Someone who should have given her a lifetime instead took everything away. December 14th, 2012. That's when Macy Grace Diddy came into this world in Cumberland County, North Carolina. She was born with those bright eyes that seemed to take in everything around her, the kind of eyes that made strangers smile when they saw her at the grocery store. Macy had this infectious laugh that could fill up an entire room, and she was curious about everything. At 2 years old, she was already showing signs of being a smart little girl who loved to explore, loved to play, and loved to be around people. Her mother, Jeannie Diddy, was just 21 when Macy was born. Jeannie was a young woman trying to make her way in the world, and she had joined the U.S. Army to build a better life for herself and her daughter. By 2015, Jeannie was 23 years old and working as an Army specialist at Fort Liberty, which was called Fort Bragg back then. The military life wasn't easy for a single mother, but Jeannie seemed determined to make it work. Fort Liberty sits right in the heart of Fayetteville, North Carolina, a town that has grown up around the military base. It's a place where soldiers come and go, where families try to build normal lives despite the constant movement and uncertainty that comes with military service. The base is huge, home to thousands of soldiers and their families. It's a community where everyone knows someone who has served, where the sound of helicopters and training exercises is just part of daily life. Jeannie had met Zachary Kiefer through the military community. Zachary was 32 years old, older than Jeannie by almost a decade. He was a former Army Special Forces soldier, the kind of man who had seen combat and carried himself with the confidence that comes from military training. Special Forces soldiers are elite, trained to handle the most dangerous missions, and Zachary had that background. He was tall, strong, and had the kind of presence that commanded respect. Their relationship had developed over time, and by 2015, Zachary was living with Jeannie and Macy in their home in Fayetteville. To outsiders, they might have looked like a typical military family. Jeannie was the active duty soldier, working her job on base while Zachary helped take care of Macy. It seemed like an arrangement that could work, a young mother getting support from her boyfriend while she served her country. Macy was the center of their world, or at least she should have been. She was at that age where everything is new and exciting. She was learning to talk in full sentences, asking endless questions the way 2-year-olds do. She loved to play with her toys, loved to watch cartoons, and had started to show her own little personality. She was the kind of child who would run up to you with her arms open, ready for a hug, trusting and innocent in a way that only small children can be. The house where they lived was typical for the area around Fort Liberty. It was a modest place, nothing fancy, but it was home. The neighborhood was quiet, filled with other military families trying to make normal lives despite the challenges that come with military service. Kids played in the yards, neighbors knew each other, and there was a sense of community that comes from shared experiences. Jeannie seemed to be managing the balance between her military duties and motherhood. She would get up early, get Macy ready for the day, and head to work on base. Zachary would often be the one watching Macy during the day, and in the evenings, they would all be together as a family. From the outside, it looked like they were making it work. But inside that house, behind closed doors, something was very wrong. Something that would soon shatter this picture of normalcy forever. Something that would turn a bright December morning into every parent's worst nightmare. December 2015 was supposed to be a month of joy and celebration. Christmas was coming, and Macy was at the perfect age to be excited about the holidays. She was old enough to understand presents and Santa Claus, old enough to get excited about the lights and decorations. It should have been a magical time for a 2-year-old girl. Instead, it became the month that changed everything. Hey everyone, I'm Lisa, and welcome to my channel. I'm not a detective, I'm not a lawyer, and I'm not a journalist. I'm just someone who believes that every victim deserves to have their story told, and that justice isn't just a word we throw around. It's something we fight for. December 2nd, 2015 started like any other Wednesday morning in Fayetteville. The sun was coming up over Fort Liberty, and families were beginning their daily routines. But in one house, something was terribly wrong. At 8:47 in the morning, a 911 call came in. The voice on the other end was calm, almost eerily so. It was Jeannie, and she was asking for an ambulance. Her daughter wasn't breathing properly, she said. The child was unresponsive. The emergency dispatcher began asking the standard questions, trying to understand what was happening. But there was something strange about this call. Jeannie's voice didn't have the panic you would expect from a mother whose child was in serious trouble. She sounded collected, almost detached, as if she was reporting a minor problem rather than a life-threatening emergency. When the paramedics arrived at the house, they found Macy lying still and pale. But what they saw made their stomachs turn. This wasn't a child who had suddenly fallen ill. This was a child who had been hurt, badly hurt. Her small body was covered in bruises, dark marks that told a story of violence and pain. The paramedics worked quickly, but they could see immediately that this was beyond anything they could handle in the field. Macy needed to get to a hospital, and she needed to get there fast. As they prepared to transport her, they noticed something else disturbing. The bruises on her body weren't fresh. Some were new, dark purple, and angry-looking. But others were older, yellow and green, the colors that bruises turn when they've been healing for days. At the hospital, the medical team took one look at Macy and knew they were dealing with something horrific. The emergency room doctors had seen injured children before, but this was different. This was systematic. The bruises covered her entire body, from her head to her legs. They were everywhere, as if someone had used this tiny child as a punching bag. I know this case is difficult to hear, but that's exactly why we need to keep talking about it. If you believe this story deserves attention, show your support by hitting the like button. It helps the algorithm push this content to more people who need to hear it. And if you have thoughts, questions, or information about this case, please share them in the comments below. Sometimes the most important insights come from our community. The doctors began their examination, and with each passing minute, the picture became clearer and more disturbing. Macy had suffered multiple blows to her head. Her brain was swelling from the trauma. But that wasn't all. When they looked deeper, they found that her liver had been lacerated, torn from the force of whatever had happened to her. Internal bleeding was threatening her life. The medical staff worked frantically to save her. They knew they were racing against time, but they also knew they were fighting injuries that no 2-year-old should ever have to endure. How does a toddler suffer this kind of damage? How does a child who should be playing with toys and watching cartoons end up fighting for her life with injuries that looked like they came from a car accident? Back at the house, investigators began asking questions. Jeannie's story kept changing. First, she said Macy had fallen down the stairs. Then she said the child had been playing and hit her head. When pressed for details, she offered another version, then another. Each story was different, and none of them explained the extensive injuries the doctors were finding. Zachary was there too, and he had his own version of events. He said he had been sleeping when it happened. He claimed he didn't know how Macy had gotten hurt. But the investigators noticed something in his demeanor, something that made them uncomfortable. He seemed nervous, defensive, like someone who was hiding something. For 2 days, Macy fought for her life in the pediatric intensive care unit. The doctors did everything they could, but the damage was too severe. Her little body had been through too much. The machines that were keeping her alive couldn't repair what had been broken. On December 4th, 2015, Macy Grace Diddy died. She was 2 years old. The hospital became a crime scene. The child who had come in fighting for her life was now the victim of what would officially become a homicide investigation. Someone had killed this little girl, and the people who were supposed to protect her were the only ones who had been with her when it happened. The investigation began immediately. Detective teams descended on the house, photographing every room, collecting evidence, and trying to piece together what had happened in those final hours of Macy's life. The Cumberland County Sheriff's Office knew they were dealing with a child homicide, and the pressure was enormous. The first problem investigators faced was the conflicting stories. Jeannie couldn't keep her account straight. In one interview, she insisted Macy had fallen down the stairs while playing. When detectives pointed out that the house was a single-story home with no stairs, she quickly changed her story. Now she claimed Macy had been jumping on the couch and fell off, hitting her head on the coffee table. But the medical examiner's preliminary findings didn't match any of these explanations. The injuries were too severe, too widespread, and too consistent with repeated trauma. This wasn't an accident. This was abuse, and it had been going on for some time. The focus quickly shifted to Zachary Kiefer. Here was a man with military training, someone who knew how to use force. He was bigger and stronger than Jeannie, and he had been the primary caregiver for Macy during the day while Jeannie worked. The investigators began building a case around him. Zachary became the prime suspect almost immediately. Neighbors were interviewed, and some reported hearing arguing coming from the house. Others mentioned seeing Zachary outside, seemingly agitated. The pieces seemed to fit. A former Special Forces soldier, trained in combat, living with a woman and her child. The classic scenario of a boyfriend who couldn't handle the responsibility of caring for someone else's child. The community was outraged. Word spread quickly through the military base and the surrounding neighborhoods. People who had known Zachary were shocked, but others weren't surprised. They whispered about how difficult it must be for a single mother to find a good man, how dangerous it was to bring strangers into your home around your children. Jeannie played the role of the grieving mother perfectly. She appeared at press conferences, tears streaming down her face, pleading for justice for her daughter. She talked about how much she loved Macy, how she would never hurt her, how she trusted Zachary to care for her child while she served her country. The investigation seemed to be moving forward, but then it stalled. The evidence against Zachary was circumstantial. Yes, he had been in the house. Yes, he had been caring for Macy. But there was no direct evidence that he had harmed her. No witnesses, no confession, no clear motive. Months passed. The medical examiner's office took time to complete their full report. The community grew restless. Where was the arrest? Where was the justice for this innocent child? The case was getting media attention, and the pressure on law enforcement was intense. Then, in March 2016, something unexpected happened. The medical examiner officially ruled Macy's death a homicide. The very next day, arrest warrants were issued. But not just for Zachary Kiefer. Both Jeannie and Zachary were arrested and charged with first-degree murder and negligent child abuse. The investigators had discovered something that changed everything about the case. Something that made them realize they had been looking at this all wrong from the beginning. The grieving mother wasn't just a victim.
She was a suspect.
And what they were about to uncover would shock everyone who thought they knew this case. The breakthrough came from an unexpected source, and it was so disturbing that even seasoned investigators struggled to process what they were seeing. What case do you think I should cover next? Drop your suggestions in the comments below. I read every single one, and your input helps guide the content on this channel. Together, we can make sure that no victim is forgotten and no injustice goes unnoticed. After Macy's death, while the investigation was still focusing on Zachary as the primary suspect, Jeannie did something that would haunt everyone involved in the case. She reached out to a local photographer named Sunny Joe with a request that defied all logic and human decency. Jeannie wanted photographs taken at Macy's grave. But not just any photographs. She wanted what she called afterlife photos, where images of Macy would be digitally edited into pictures of Jeannie at the graveside, making it appear as though the dead child was there with her mother. When Sunny Joe first received the request, she couldn't believe what she was hearing. This was a mother who had just lost her 2-year-old daughter in a brutal homicide, and she wanted to pose for pictures at the grave with her dead child's image superimposed next to her. The photographer was so disturbed by the request that she initially refused. But Jeannie was persistent. She kept calling, kept asking, kept pushing for these photographs to be taken. She seemed obsessed with the idea, as if having these images would somehow serve a purpose that no one else could understand. Finally, reluctantly, the photographer agreed to meet with her. The photo session that followed was unlike anything Sunny Joe had ever experienced. Jeannie arrived at the cemetery and posed next to Macy's grave, smiling and acting as if this was a normal family portrait session. She gave directions about how she wanted the ghostly image of Macy to be positioned in the photos, discussing it with the same casual tone someone might use when arranging a birthday party picture. The resulting images were haunting and deeply disturbing. They showed Jeannie appearing to interact with a translucent, ghostly figure of Macy, as if the dead child was there with her. To anyone looking at these photos, they would seem like the work of a mother who had completely lost touch with reality, someone whose grief had driven her to do something unthinkable. But investigators began to see something else in these photos. This wasn't the behavior of a grieving mother. This was the behavior of someone who was performing grief, someone who was trying to create a narrative that painted her as the loving, devoted mother who missed her child. The photographer, disturbed by what she had witnessed, eventually came forward to law enforcement. She told them about the bizarre photo session, about Jeannie's demeanor, about how wrong the entire situation had felt. She turned over copies of the photos and described how calm and collected Jeannie had been throughout the entire process. This revelation completely changed the direction of the investigation. Suddenly, investigators began looking at Jeannie not as a grieving mother, but as someone who might be capable of deception on a massive scale. If she could orchestrate such a disturbing photo session, what else might she be capable of? The focus shifted dramatically. Detectives began re-examining every statement Jeannie had made, every tear she had shed, every public appearance where she had pleaded for justice. They started to see patterns they had missed before, inconsistencies that hadn't seemed important when they were focused on Zachary. The community was stunned. The woman they had sympathized with, the mother they had supported, was now under suspicion for her own daughter's murder. Everything they thought they knew about this case was wrong. The investigation was starting over, and this time, they were looking at a completely different suspect. The truth was more horrifying than anyone had imagined. The person who had killed Macy Grace Diddy wasn't the boyfriend everyone suspected. It was her own mother. This channel is more than just true crime content. It's a community of people who refuse to let injustice go unnoticed. In the comments, I want you to respectfully share your thoughts, support other community members, and help us build a space where every victim's story is treated with the dignity it deserves. Your voice matters here. As investigators dug deeper into Jeannie's background, a disturbing picture began to emerge. Behind the facade of the dedicated Army specialist and loving mother was a woman living a completely different life. Jeannie had been having affairs while in her relationship with Zachary, meeting other men and maintaining secret relationships that added stress and chaos to her already complicated life. But the affairs were just the surface. The real problem was that Jeannie had never wanted to be a mother in the first place. At 21, she had found herself pregnant and alone, and the responsibilities of raising a child while trying to build a military career had become overwhelming. Instead of seeking help, she had turned to violence as a way to cope with her frustration. The evidence against her was devastating. Medical experts testified that Macy's injuries showed a pattern of abuse that had been going on for weeks, possibly months. The bruises in different stages of healing told the story of a child who had been systematically beaten by someone she trusted completely. Someone who should have protected her above all else. Cell phone records revealed that Jeannie had been searching the internet for information about child injuries and what would be considered suspicious by medical professionals. She had been researching how to explain away bruises and injuries, looking for ways to make abuse appear accidental. This wasn't a moment of lost control. This was calculated and deliberate. The most damning evidence came from Zachary himself. Once he was no longer considered the primary suspect, he began cooperating fully with investigators. He revealed that he had witnessed Jeannie's violent outbursts toward Macy, but had been too afraid to report them. He described incidents where Jeannie would lose her temper and strike the child, then immediately afterward act as if nothing had happened. On November 15, 2019, all charges against Zachary Kiefer were dropped. The evidence clearly showed that he had not been the one who killed Macy. He had been a convenient scapegoat, someone easy to blame because he fit the profile of what people expected a child killer to look like. The revelation that Jeannie was the real perpetrator sent shockwaves through the community. People who had supported her, who had believed her tears and her pleas for justice, felt betrayed and disgusted. She had looked them in the eye and lied, using their sympathy to cover up her own crime. Macy's extended family was devastated. Her grandmother, Tina Goodwin, had been one of Jeannie's strongest supporters throughout the initial investigation. Learning that the person she had comforted and defended was actually her granddaughter's killer was almost too much to bear. The case had taken nearly 4 years to reach this point, for years of pain and confusion and misdirection. Now, finally, there was clarity about what had really happened to Macy Grace Diddy. Her own mother, the person who should have loved and protected her more than anyone else in the world, had been the one who took her life. The truth was uglier than anyone had wanted to believe. The trial of Jeannie Diddy began in 2020, nearly 5 years after Macy's death. The courtroom was packed with family members, military personnel, and community members who had followed this case from the beginning. The atmosphere was tense, heavy with the weight of what everyone knew they were about to hear. The prosecution laid out their case methodically. They presented the medical evidence showing Macy's extensive injuries, the pattern of abuse that had escalated over time, and Jeannie's attempts to cover up her crimes. Expert witnesses testified about the severity of the trauma inflicted on such a small child, forcing everyone in the courtroom to confront the reality of what Macy had endured. The most heartbreaking testimony came from Macy's grandmother, Tina Goodwin. Through tears, she described the little girl who had been taken from them, the bright spirit who should have had a full life ahead of her. She spoke about the family's willingness to take custody of Macy if Jeannie had been struggling, about all the support that had been available but never requested. Jeannie's defense team tried to paint her as a young mother overwhelmed by circumstances, but the evidence was overwhelming. The deliberate nature of the abuse, the internet searches, the lies told to investigators, all pointed to someone who knew exactly what she was doing. After days of testimony, the jury began deliberations. But what came next shocked everyone. The jury was deadlocked. 10 jurors voted to convict Jeannie of murder, but 2 held out. A hung jury meant no conviction, no closure, no justice for Macy. The family was devastated. Tina Goodwin collapsed in the courtroom, unable to process that her granddaughter's killer might go free. The community was outraged. How could there be no justice for a murdered child? In November 2021, Jeannie was released on bond while awaiting a retrial. The sight of her walking free while Macy remained in her grave was too much for many to bear. The family continued their fight for justice, but the system had failed them. Macy Grace Diddy would have been 9 years old today. She would have been in elementary school, making friends, learning to read, discovering what she loved about the world. Instead, she is remembered as a victim of the person who should have protected her most. This case reminds us that evil can hide behind the most trusted faces, that children depend on adults to keep them safe, and that we must never stop fighting for those who cannot fight for themselves. Macy's story demands that we do better, that we recognize the signs, that we speak up when children are in danger. Her memory deserves nothing less than our continued vigilance and our unwavering commitment to protecting the innocent.